UCLA's recruiting has risen to the top 10 with DeShaun Foster's efforts. But now, the Bruins, with their latest commits, have staying power for now and years to come.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Locked On UCLA podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making this show your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe, download. Thanks for your support. Welcome back, everydayers. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Go check it out. What we're talking about today, UCLA and what they got in their latest commitments. The Bruins have pushed their total over to 20-plus commits in the class of 26. Where do they rank? And how have they impressed people who cover recruiting in the state of Florida? I'll talk about that later. And I've already talked with Brian Smith. This is more continual, words of affirmation, if you will, of what UCLA has been able to do with their state of Florida recruiting. So now the Bruins, over the weekend, have pushed their recruiting number in the class of 2026 to 22 commits. UCLA now has 22 commits in the class of 26. Now, whether they'll stay, whether that happens to be something that is a trend in the right direction for years to come, UCLA is a class of 26, and they've dominated. About 14 to 15 commits in this month alone, and we're barely just a little over 3 weeks in the month of June, and the Bruins are hammered in. They've been crazy at what they've been wanting to get, and in multiple outlets, it's one thing to get to the top 10, and the rankings fluctuate so much that with a commit once or twice, you can go in the top 10, top 5, bounce out. UCLA, with their latest commits, are hovering, if not in or close to, the top 10 ranking in still multiple outlets, whether it's Rivals or 24/7 Sports. UCLA, it's not like they're going to drop off. Barring a decommitment, they have stayed. And who are the latest guys? UCLA has had 2 commits over the weekends, pair of family members and relatives. And then the latest commit was Xavier Warren. So let's get to 2 of the latest UCLA commits coming to UCLA. So let's talk to you about 2 guys, Malachi and Madden. Yes, another commit from Madden, both hailing from Kahuku, 2 defenders. You have a linebacker and a safety, the Soliais, if I'm hopefully saying that correctly. So you have Malachi and Madden, first cousins who they consider themselves like brothers. This is what I'm reading from the write-up from Tracy McDonald's report from the Bruin Blitz. This is the quote that talked about these 2 guys who over the weekend committed once and committed twice, kind of emphasizing that family-like atmosphere that DeShaun Foster wants, right? He's literally, pun intended, fostering a family culture, discipline, respect, enthusiasm. We want the SoCal kids to come home. We're going to go to Florida. We're going to get a couple of guys. We'll get some high school teammates. We get Micah Smith. He's going to convince his high school teammate to come join him. They're going to get a couple of guys from the state of Florida. They're going to go, all right, if they're going after cousins, they tried to have Talanoa Ely, even though he committed to USC. UCLA put in a good effort for one of the best linebackers in this class, and they went with the family approach. They went, all right, look at all these guys, including other members of your family who might be recruited by us. Think about the legacy you could leave here. That's what they're trying to do, and build and instill in these families that might have more than one sibling, that might have guys in the same class, same age, that have grown up as like Madden and Malachi have, potentially as brothers, more first cousins, but that tight-knit community, bring them together and bring UCLA together. So it was a joint commitment on Saturday, the 20th and 21st commits. And in addition, they're also cousins of Nico and Madden Imaleava. So you got 2 Maddens who are cousins. You got Nico, and that's where you're like, oh, this is where this whole family-like culture is brought in. These relationships DeShaun Foster is maintaining, sustaining, building, growing to maybe the islands of Hawaii, right? You've got Ikaika Malloy trying to go bring more players over. You've got going across the country to Florida, trying to establish something in the Midwest. Brian Smith even said UCLA could go after guys. They haven't necessarily done this, but maybe the next stop is going into Texas and bringing in a couple of guys from Texas as maybe a goal, right? You think of building goals from now into the future. Maybe UCLA's next goal is, hey, let's go get a guy or 2 from Texas, all right? They've already been able to break in Florida, a couple of Midwest recruits, some of which have flipped or stayed with UCLA, but building a base that you would think they already had it in Los Angeles, in the West Coast. They had to rebuild it, start from the ground up with what Chip Kelly left in just tatters, just non-existent. The Bruins come together, and Madden and Malachi, 3 stars, safety, linebacker. Obviously, things could change over the last senior year into development stage and what UCLA might use, right? If Akaika Malloy's still there next year as the defensive coordinator, I don't see why not. But if he's still there, maybe things change. You could always see a position switch. But these are 2 guys to land an offer from Akaika Malloy, all right? What this article from Tracy McDonald says, making this comparison, is think of one of the linebackers, apparently similar comparison to Darius Moiseau, all right? And that was a guy where the relationship with Akaika Malloy led to the transferring from Hawaii to UCLA. And we already know about Malloy's track record with what UCLA brought in the portal and the defensive talent that surged a couple of seasons ago with Moiseau, who's in the NFL, with Laiatu Latu overcoming his injuries to come to UCLA, how the Bruins were able to facilitate that. That's the magic of Akaika Malloy. So if you're getting a direct invite into UCLA, that's all right. These kids have to be talented, right? They're heading into their senior years of high school, respectively, for the 2 of them. So they had a big official visit on Mother's Day, right? That was the big family weekend right around, I believe the Elis were going. You have Nico and Madden Iamaleava already with committing and transferring into UCLA. This is the big base that UCLA is trying to bring in. And for these guys, they had offers from Big Ten schools, ACC schools, Boise State, which is turning into a team that made the playoff and is turning into a new Pac-12 school. Think about all these things UCLA is competing with. They're starting to win and battle in the 2026 class. So that's huge with what UCLA has been able to get. And again, they continue to shout out, all right, this is the new staff. We love the new staff. So DeShaun Foster, in the span of an offseason, has established a recruiting base, replaced one of his most important recruiting pieces, has not missed a beat, while, in addition, maintaining new staffers to build and continue to have those relationships with these kids. Another guy who committed to UCLA on the day I recorded this podcast, June 23rd, I saw his post, reposted it on social media on the Locked On UCLA account. Locked On Bruins, safely, it's what it's called. You have a Texas kid, Xavier Warren. Tracy McDonald does do a great job for the Bruin Blitz. This is what he had to say about him. This is another guy that brings up UCLA's commitment level to 22 commits from 14 in this month of June. And now UCLA, as I talked about, where are they going to go to? Next, Texas. Where did Brian Smith of Locked On the Portal talked about? Where does UCLA go next? Maybe go to the state of Texas. Well, Georgetown, Texas, is where UCLA went to go get Xavier Warren. And the idea is this is a guy that's got a lot of blazing speed, maybe a comparison to somebody who maybe as a receiver with the speed of a Roderick Pleasant, who just transferred it from Oregon as a DB. That type of elite track speed is what Warren's supposed to get. So while UCLA's hit Florida, a lot of big-time offensive line commits in the last couple of weeks from that state of Florida, the Bruins go to Texas and add another receiver. And the wide receiver group has been absolutely filled with talent. The one thing that worries me is there's so many new faces coming in. Does that scare off a commit? Are they stockpiling for the expectation of guys leaving next year, 1 or 2 guys to decommit? I wonder if we'll see that happen later in this cycle, if that affects UCLA's ranking and standing and recruiting too much overall. But now the Bruins have another blazing speed guy from the state of Texas, and I wonder where Warren's going to stand, where guys like the Pula brothers, Jonas Smith, Santana Carlos, or some of those previous wide receiver commits from all over. And right when UCLA's starting to get things in Florida, maybe they're starting to plant a seed in Texas, and maybe that can grow into something in the future. Those are huge things for UCLA. Next, I'm going to tell you about some thoughts people have put out there for UCLA's recruiting out of nowhere in the state of Florida. We'll talk about that next on Locked On UCLA. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game more exciting. You're already following the action. And why not make it a little more thrilling with FanDuel? Because you can get on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. Oh, yeah, let's talk about that. You can use FanDuel to track your favorite matchups, right? Think about baseball, all those big-time matchups coming up in the summer, and the app keeps it fresh. You're like, all right, I'm learning baseball. Maybe that's something newer to you in a betting opportunity. There's new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's super easy to use, fast to pay out, and the regular season games feel like must-watch events, even during those dog days of the summer. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can just bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So we know by now UCLA continues to recruit. The biggest upcoming commitment that I've tried to see for UCLA that is on their prospect radar is Oscar Rios. You see the day, June 27th, he's going to announce his commitment, and that's where UCLA could solidify themselves, I think, as a firm top 10 team, regardless of how the class of 26 finishes. If he comes to UCLA, could find themselves, the Bruins could, with their quarterback of the future, if they get an Oscar Rios who just competed in the Elite 11 finals that took place in Manhattan Beach. He's that guy that if he fills into his role, is somebody that maybe, just maybe, could start next year, or if Nico stays the extra year and utilizes that redshirt junior year at UCLA, could find himself as a redshirt competing as his second year as a Bruin, all right? So I wonder if UCLA secures that commitment, that'd be huge again for UCLA, building for the now, building for the future, having depth and options at the QB position for the future. And even in this day and age of the portal and what the revenue sharing might look like, continuing to win in recruiting after what they did in the portal would be great for DeShaun Foster and company, and continue to prove that Tino Sunseri has already done wonders with his relationships in recruiting. Brought somebody basically on the eve of early signing day. That dude left after Nico came in. They're already building for the future with the relationships in Southern California. I think that'd say a lot about Tino if he's been able to continue this relationship with Oscar Rios and convince him right now between choosing UCLA or Arizona to come to UCLA. I think Arizona would lead to more opportunities for Rios to start right away, but I think UCLA would present a higher ceiling if he stays and decides to go with the Bruins, despite it being a little cloudy after this year as to what the quarterback situation might look like with Nico, with Madden, with Pierce Clarkson, with the guys already there that did not transfer out, and Oscar Rios. That's a little cloudy, right? And if Arizona doesn't succeed since Jed Fish left with their newer head coach heading into year two, that could be a murky situation. I think DeShaun Foster is in a lot better standing than some other year two coaches. DeShaun Foster has done a great job. So that's what's going to make this Oscar Rios situation unique. That's a little update on that. Now, moving into this Florida dominance for UCLA, I was taking a look at the Treasure Palm prep recruiting, and they're keeping tabs like, all right, these are, our local Florida commits. You'd think, okay, maybe some are going to Gainesville, some are going to Tallahassee. Maybe, you're thinking, oh, we're going to go elsewhere in the state, going to Central Florida, go to UCF, Florida Atlantic, right? Maybe they're going to go locally to some SEC schools, hop a couple of states over to some ACC schools. And that's generally where these guys from the state of Florida are going to go. So when they had 3 top 100 guys from their Florida network, USA Today network, it's like, okay, you wouldn't think a lot of those guys would choose UCLA. And I've already harped on this, even Brian Smith, who is from Florida. We're all stunned with what UCLA has been able to do, and it continues to build with Micah Smith, Johnny Jones, Xavier Stinson, who are all key recruits in that state and will have absolutely bolstered UCLA's ranking in 24/7 Sports Rivals on 3 to close to, if not inside, the top 10 for the class of 26. So I was reading from this Treasure Palm recruiting site. You have John Santucci, Nick Wilson, Chris Boyle of Treasure Coast Papers. And they're like, who, other than Florida, has impressed you in recruiting? They had one answer. All 3 of these guys came out and immediately said UCLA. How often do you get a Florida-based paper, Florida-based recruiting site come out and say, oh, yeah, by the way, UCLA is impressed us in recruiting? All right? You've had Brian be like, wait, what's going on? You've had us on the West Coast like, where are they going? And what UCLA has been able to build they're like straight up every single one UCLA is the school outside of maybe the mainstay Florida that's impressed them. Normally you'd be like, okay, it's Florida State. You think about the older days in previous generations of college football. No, UCLA has continued to build and impress. This is what Boyle had to say about UCLA. The Bruins being able to get two of the better offensive linemen, bringing in Champ Smith, bringing in Johnny Jones from across the country is big. This is what they had to say on their Treasure Coast newspaper. In addition to bringing in Xavier Stinson, Santana Carlos, the Florida commits have ran their number up to 4. It's one thing to win 1, to win 2, but when a high school teammate is convincing his other high school teammate to join him to go across the country, this has become a pattern, and it's now a pipeline for UCLA in this year's recruiting class. So the impression of UCLA getting two of the better offensive linemen at a position of need has been huge. What is also huge is UCLA getting tackles and then battling with some of the other players across the country. Now, yes, there are some other schools that have done well in recruiting in the state of Florida, but the ability to do so from across the U.S. has been huge for UCLA. The addition for UCLA, Santucci put in Xavier Stinson is somebody who's a late bloomer in this class. He's maybe one of those guys that don't have the big 5-star rating next to his name that could potentially break out. Maybe not exactly here, but the word that Santucci uses from this article in the TC Palm is he's a little bit of a late bloomer. All right. Now, there's other schools that have done some work in the state of Florida. Obviously, Florida's going to do things. Maybe Florida State makes a big comeback in the class of 26. I'm not entirely sure. It's more UCLA. That's not their neck of the woods. That's not their neighborhood. And they, boom, put a big UCLA Bruin statue. They put a Joe Bruin in the middle of it all. Said, hey, you're coming to UCLA, whether you like it or not. And they certainly have. They've certainly built themselves into a recruiting pipeline. So the Florida guys are all saying it, whether it's in the Locked On Network, the local recruiting prep scene, all of us over here on the West Coast, like, whoa, what are they doing? And you mix in Xavier Warren's commitment, so now they've jumped into Texas, like Brian Smith was alluding to. Man, that is something. Absolutely something for what UCLA's been able to do. And with that, that's where we're going to wrap up today. Again, the 8 clap, because the Bruins are sitting top 10 with staying power and a huge commitment potentially in Oscar Rios if he decides to come to UCLA to keep them in the top 10 for good in this year's upcoming recruiting class. Huge. Hands up, Bruins fans. 8 clap time, baby. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA, fight, fight, fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Zach signing off. Go Bruins.